The chaos began at 4 p.m. A luxury hotel, an international conference. Dozens of guests, panicked, desperate to be understood. Languages clashed like thunder in the air. Translators ran in circles, apps froze, staff broke down in frustration. Nothing worked, nothing made sense, until a woman stood up. And when she spoke, the entire room froze. She didn't shout. She didn't pause. She simply looked at people and answered them in their own languages, one by one. Uzbek, Amharic, Malay, Haitian Creole, Arabic, as if every word had been born inside her. The crowd watched in stunned silence. No one understood what was happening, but everyone knew they were witnessing something rare, very rare. She spoke every language, every single one, with precision, with soul, with something no one could explain. She didn't wear a special badge. She wasn't part of the interpreter team. She was just staff, a woman no one noticed until that moment. But once she opened her mouth, the impossible happened. A lobby on the verge of collapse became a sanctuary of calm. The shouting turned into gratitude, and the woman no one knew became the answer everyone needed. Since that day, the rumors haven't stopped. Who is she? Guests whisper. Where did she come from? How is this even possible? No degrees, no interviews, no explanation. Only one undeniable fact remains. Where no one understood, she understood it all. And not with effort, but with ease, as if the world had always been speaking to her. This is the true story of the woman who speaks every language, but almost never speaks about herself. A story about a gift no one can trace, and a moment when humanity cried out, and only she could translate the pain. Get ready to feel chills, awe, and deep emotion. Because sometimes, the voice that saves a crowd comes from someone who was never heard. And when heaven wants to speak to everyone at once, it chooses someone like her. Someone who speaks to the world without ever raising her voice.
Before diving into this exciting story, we want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our incredible content. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, now is the perfect time to do so. By subscribing, you'll become a valued member of our growing community, where we share amazing stories, insightful lessons, and much more. Don't wait any longer. Hit that subscribe button now and join us on this amazing journey.
It was raining that morning. Not a storm, but that steady kind of rain that feels like it's trying to wash old memories away. Lorraine Harris arrived early at the Bella Vista Grand, her new workplace. She crossed the marble lobby with small steps, avoiding the sharp clicks of expensive heels around her. Her dark blue uniform was spotless, and the golden cross brooch glimmered softly beneath her pressed collar. No one noticed when she knelt behind the front desk, held the tiny cross between her fingers, and whispered, "Lord, give me strength for today." She had said those same words every day for the past 15 years, since her mother passed. The hotel corridors were cold, mirrored, and soulless. Lorraine walked with her head down, avoiding eye contact like someone carrying the weight of the world who would rather not be seen. Every movement was measured. The way she placed her hands on the counter, the precise folding of documents, the silent breathing so as not to disturb. Words were hard, but silence was familiar. A kind of armor. The supervisor introduced her to the team as the new night receptionist, without much interest. Miranda Wallace only gave her a glance, cold, quick, and judging before walking away. In the staff lounge, Lorraine sat in the corner with an apple and a bottle of water. She watched others talk, laugh, and share jokes she wouldn't dare interrupt. In the pocket of her uniform, she carried an old blue notebook where she wrote down foreign phrases. Not to impress, it was how she coped. She learned languages, the way others remembered passwords, instinctively, effortlessly, but she hid it like a scar. A gift, when revealed in the wrong place, can become a target. That evening, back in her modest apartment in Harlem, Lorraine carefully removed her shoes and put water on to boil. The radio played softly an old instrumental tune. On the wall, a portrait of her mother smiled gently, a serene black woman in white, holding a Bible. Lorraine spoke to her in thought. She shared the day's details without words, and always prayed that her light wouldn't dim. "I'm trying, Mama, even though I'm scared." There was something ancient, almost sacred in Lorraine's gestures. Every word left unsaid, every glance avoided, was shaped by decades of surviving where she wasn't welcome. At 20, she had earned a scholarship to study linguistics. It didn't last. A professor once called her socially impaired after she avoided class presentations. That same night, she walked away from college and never looked back. Since then, she took behind-the-scenes jobs, invisible work. That's how she learned to live, without noise. But Bella Vista was different. Its elegance was a thin gloss over fierce competition. Lorraine sensed it right away. Employees smiled with perfect teeth but sharp eyes, especially Miranda, whose look made it clear Lorraine didn't belong. Still, Lorraine did what she always did. Showed up early, followed every rule, left after everyone, unseen, but steady. That night, after her shift, she stood before the hotel's front window. She looked at her own reflection with quiet disbelief. There she was, 56 gray curls pinned back gently, eyes marked by years of silence, and yet a spark, faint, but alive, as if, despite everything, there was still room for something new. She took a deep breath, touched her mother's cross at her collar, and whispered, "If this place is a desert, let there be manna." Behind her, the floral arrangements in the lobby swayed softly with the air conditioning. Lorraine turned slowly and walked toward the subway. She didn't know what was coming, but something inside her, timid and stubborn, was beginning to stir, as if the pain of years was rehearsing its response. The city was on alert. The International Cultural Diversity Conference was just 2 days away, and the Bella Vista Grand was preparing as if royalty were arriving. Flags from dozens of countries hung from the ceiling. Exotic flower arrangements arrived in glass cases. Protocols were whispered with mounting tension. Lorraine, as always, moved quietly through it all. She handled the smallest details, restocking water bottles, aligning interpreter badges, checking lighting on welcome desks. No one noticed her. But her eyes missed nothing, and her ears, even less. Beside the front desk, as she labeled welcome folders, Lorraine quietly muttered syllables only she understood. In her pocket, the worn blue notebook rested, filled with phonetic symbols, arrows, grammar sketches, all written in neat black pen. She wasn't studying to impress. This was her sanctuary. Language was her hidden shelter, her map of the world. And now, the world had come to her. Every unfamiliar sound echoing through the lobby felt like an open window. She didn't need to understand everything. She only needed to listen with her heart. That afternoon, a new guest arrived. An older man with a well-groomed beard, dark hat, and a cane that tapped softly on the marble. His light eyes scanned the room calmly, like someone quietly measuring everything. He spoke a few words, none in English. The receptionist beside Lorraine froze. She tried a phone translator, but it didn't recognize the language. The man smiled politely and moved on to the elevator. From the back of the room, Lorraine didn't blink. She recognized the rhythm, that cadence, that melody. It wasn't French. It was something older. She had seen it once. Yellowed pages, in a forgotten book 30 years ago. That night, alone in her apartment, Lorraine dug through a shoebox and found the old notebook. Tucked between her mother's letters and a faded bookmark with Bible verses, she flipped to the page where she had once scribbled, Occitan, nearly extinct language from southern France. Soft inflections, Catalan influence, fluid phonemes. She closed her eyes. The memory came like the scent of old paper. Herself at 26, hiding in the Brooklyn Public Library, listening to a cassette tape of long-forgotten words. Back then, it was her safe place, when the world outside felt too cruel. Back at the hotel, the chaos grew. Security teams, interpreters, guests with impossible names, all arriving in a rush. Lorraine stayed invisible, but listening. Every language was a song. She whispered phrases under her breath as she walked through the halls. She tested sounds with her tongue, silently compared grammar structures. Her mind was built to decipher what others dismissed, but it was still her secret. And secrets, she knew, were safer kept hidden. She crossed paths with the old man again, this time in the elevator. He gave her a respectful nod. Lorraine returned a small smile, head lowered. But in her mind, she replayed the word he had spoken as he stepped off. Benvenguda. She knew that word. It meant welcome. But it wasn't French. It wasn't Spanish. It was Occitan. And that certainty made her tremble. Not because of the language, but because of what it meant. That man wasn't just a tourist. He was watching, testing, waiting. Later that night, Lorraine walked the quiet hotel corridors, gathering magazines left behind on chairs. Everything seemed still, but her mind was burning. She caught her reflection in a hallway mirror and, for a moment, saw the little girl she used to be, the one who made up languages while her mother whispered, "You're different, baby, and that's your gift." Lorraine swallowed hard. She had tried to forget that part of herself, but life seemed ready to unbury what she had long hidden. Before ending her shift, she did something she hadn't done in years. She opened a blank page in her notebook and wrote firmly, "I can't keep hiding." Then she drew the symbol she always used to remind herself of her truth. An open parenthesis, a cross, and a question mark. And finally, as if praying again, "If this language finds me again, let it be for something bigger than fear." Lorraine didn't expect to be called in, especially not by the manager. When Miranda Wallace appeared, heels clicking sharply on marble like a warning, Lorraine's heart picked up pace. "Ms. Harris, please come with me to the conference room," she said. Her voice was polished, but her tone cut deep. Lorraine nodded, eyes down, and followed the woman down silent corridors, past framed awards and executive portraits that seemed to judge her with every step. Inside the meeting room, it was just the two of them. Miranda sat with elegance, crossed her legs, and smiled in a way that felt more like a threat. "You're competent," Miranda began, adjusting her blazer without making eye contact. "But at this hotel, we value image and charm. You speak too softly, avoid eye contact, and frankly, you don't give our elite guests a sense of assurance." Lorraine stood still, absorbing the words. They weren't new. In fact, they echoed a memory too familiar. Different voice, same message. "We can't afford for guests to feel like they've checked into a library," Miranda added with a smug smile. Lorraine closed her eyes for a beat. That old wound cracked open again. 25 years ago, in a room just like this, a professor had said, "You have a brilliant mind, but no social aptitude for this field." That was the day she left college. Walked out without saying goodbye. Left behind books, dreams, and a version of herself that once dared to reach higher. Since then, she had hidden behind uniforms, front desks, and predictable routines. Life hurt less when she didn't try. Back in the room, Miranda waited for a response. Lorraine whispered, "Yes, ma'am." No sarcasm, no anger, just the voice of someone who had learned to survive by yielding. Miranda seemed satisfied with the submission and waved her off. Lorraine stood, straightened her uniform, and left without another word. Her steps were light, but inside something cracked. An old exhaustion. A wound that had never really healed. During her break, Lorraine found a quiet spot behind the staff pantry. Between stacks of supply boxes and cleaning cloths, she sat on the floor. She took off her crucifix brooch, held it tightly, and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. Just breathed deeply, as if speaking to God without words. "Lord, if this place is a desert, let there be manna," She repeated it as she always did. But this time, her prayer carried something new. A plea for courage. Later, that night, Lorraine walked the wet sidewalk toward the subway. New York's lights shimmered in puddles like storefronts selling things she didn't need. In the empty train car, she closed her eyes. Memories of college, the library, the Occitan cassette, they all returned, like the past knocking, asking. A question she never dared answer. But in the quiet of the train, something stirred. It wasn't anger, it was hunger for meaning. Something inside her refused to stay asleep. At home, Lorraine didn't turn on the radio. She sat at the edge of her bed, notebook in hand. She ran her fingers over old notes, read forgotten phrases in vanishing languages, and smiled faintly, recognizing her own handwriting like an old friend. Then she wrote, "The voices of others may wound, but mine still exists." And below that, she added, "I will no longer be my own silence." Meanwhile, in her penthouse, Miranda sipped expensive wine, unaware that the woman she had dismissed as forgettable was, in that exact moment, beginning her crossing. What Miranda didn't know is that you should never provoke a woman with deep scars, because sometimes courage is born from pain. It was 4:12 p.m. when the first shouts echoed through the Bella Vista Grand's marble lobby. The storm had arrived, not from the sky but from the clashing voices of dozens of guests, each speaking a different language. The day shift receptionist fumbled with a translation app that only made things worse. A group from Uzbekistan waved their arms angrily over missing luggage. A Haitian woman sobbed, trying to explain she had lost her husband. 3 guests from Cambodia were already demanding a refund. The lobby, once so majestic, now felt like a battlefield of confusion. Lorraine was in the staff lounge, carefully folding a napkin, the same way she always did, corner to corner, precise crease, perfect symmetry. The noise outside made her pause. Disorder always rattled her. It cracked the stability of her inner world. She set the napkin down, touched the brooch at her collar, and took a deep breath. Logic whispered, "Stay here. It's not your problem." But something deeper, something sacred, called her out of that room. In the hallway, she passed 2 co-workers running in opposite directions, both clutching phones with panic on their faces. Lorraine moved quietly. The lobby was a cacophony of unfamiliar languages: Amharic, Uzbek, Malay, Haitian Creole. It was a symphony of urgency no one could decode. The lead receptionist was crying, and Miranda Wallace, makeup smeared, voice sharp, shouted into her phone. Lorraine stopped. Her hand trembled. That familiar feeling returned, being watched, misjudged, misunderstood. But something stronger rose up inside, like a quiet voice, inviting her to step forward. She moved closer. The noise dimmed as people noticed her. Lorraine focused. She locked eyes with the Haitian woman and softly said, "Mwen compran ou, kaideme de ou tan pri." The woman looked at her like she had seen a miracle. You speak to me?" she asked in broken French. Lorraine nodded and gently took her hand, then turned to the Uzbek group and responded in their language, smoothly, calmly. The tone of the entire lobby began to shift. Slowly, Lorraine moved from group to group. Every language, every expression, every gesture. Her mind became a filter, drawing meaning from the chaos. Nothing rehearsed, nothing written down. Pure associative memory. The gift she had hidden for decades now bridged worlds. The once chaotic room softened into quiet reliefs, faint smiles, grateful eyes. And all because one woman chose to speak. From across the lobby, Miranda watched. For once, silent. The woman she had underestimated now solved a crisis that no technology, etiquette course, or PR team could fix. Lorraine, with her quiet voice, humble steps, and reverent presence, was stitching peace into the seams of the moment. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't demand applause. She simply showed up. When the last guest was helped, Lorraine stepped back behind the counter and retrieved her blue notebook. She didn't write anything. She just held it against her chest, like someone embracing a secret that no longer hurts. A nearby co-worker whispered, "How does she do that?" No one answered, but in that moment everyone knew she belonged there. Not because she fit the mold, but because she was everything the mold lacked. In the security room, the elderly guest watched through the monitor. His eyes gleamed. He leaned on his cane and smiled. The test had begun, and the invisible woman had just become the main character. The silence after the storm felt sacred. Lorraine stood still, sensing the faint energy that lingered in the lobby after the chaos. One of the newly arrived translators watched her with quiet curiosity. She didn't know it yet, but her name was now whispered throughout the hotel, not in gossip but in awe. Lorraine Harris, the woman no one saw, had done the impossible. She understood without judging, translated without controlling, welcomed without fanfare. But she stayed grounded. Her world had many layers, and even sincere praise still made her feel off balance. Minutes later, she walked to the far end of the lobby to retrieve a glass left on the table. A simple gesture, yet filled with purpose. As if to remind herself, she belonged. Not just through her intellect, but through her presence. She touched the cross brooch at her collar, grounding herself, then stepped toward the center of the lobby, with steady, composed steps. Conversations began to quiet. Lorraine approached a Cambodian guest struggling with a form. She smiled gently, sat beside him, and began to speak. Her words came softly without hesitation. She didn't just translate, she calmed. Then she moved to an Ethiopian couple, answering questions in Amharic with the ease of someone raised in it. Lorraine drifted between languages like someone reconnecting with old friends. It wasn't just a gift. It was a silent reconciliation with everything she had once feared. She was being seen, and for the first time she wasn't running. Co-workers began to gather, one then another. "Where did you study all this?" asked a young man from the events team. Lorraine hesitated, lowered her gaze, and simply said, "I learned alone. I've always liked to listen." A quiet pause followed, not from her, but from them. Because in the center of the city's most prestigious hotel stood a woman who had conquered something no degree could teach: the fear of being. From a distance, Miranda Wallace watched, arms crossed and face tight. Her eyes, once dismissive of Lorraine, now searched for meaning. But what was there to understand? That timidity could hold beauty? That silence had a language of its own? Miranda wasn't ready for that. So she walked away. Because when you can't control something, it's easier to pretend it didn't happen. After her shift, Lorraine walked to the hidden oratory beneath the hotel, a small room often ignored, with a single candle and a statue of Our Lady of Grace. She sat in the last pew, removed her brooch, and held it tightly. "Thank you for not letting me run today," she whispered. A lone tear fell, not from pain, but from something new: recognition. On her way out, she caught her reflection in the elevator mirror. She paused, saw a woman in a modest uniform, dark skin, eyes marked by time. And for the first time, she smiled. Not because she had won, but because she stayed. And for Lorraine, that was the greatest victory. The sun hadn't yet risen when Lorraine arrived for her shift. The hotel was quiet, as if the world itself had paused to breathe. She adjusted her uniform in the locker room mirror, pinned the gold cross brooch carefully, and whispered her usual prayer. But something had changed within her. There was a new lightness in her shoulders, as if her soul, long folded to fit into shadows, had finally found room to stretch. She wasn't looking for praise. She simply wanted to serve in her own way. In the first hour of her shift, the lobby remained still. But at 6:13 a.m. he appeared, the elderly man with the elegant cane, the one who spoke the rare language. The one who saw beyond surface. Lorraine was arranging forms behind the desk when she heard, "Bonjour, madama." She didn't hesitate. She looked up calmly and replied, "Bonjour, comment va, senhor?" The sound of Occitan flowed like a stream, returning to its bed. Gentle, natural, almost sacred. The man smiled, delighted. He stepped closer, bowed slightly, and spoke again. Lorraine answered every phrase with grace. But it wasn't just accuracy, it was connection. She spoke with her eyes, with her soul. Each word was an invisible thread weaving past, present, and all the things she had once buried in fear. Slowly, the lobby began to fill and guests started to pause. It was a rare sight, a front desk worker speaking fluently in a nearly forgotten language. "You know what you're doing, don't you?" he asked in French. Lorraine offered a soft smile and didn't reply. The man looked around, as if recording the moment in his mind, and said in a lower voice, "Thank you for keeping the language of the spirit alive." Lorraine felt her throat tighten. She only nodded, holding back tears that had arrived uninvited. And in that instant, everything around them seemed to still. Even the elevator chime bowed to the reverence of that moment. That afternoon, the review was published. Not in local blogs, but in a respected European travel journal. The headline read in elegant print, "Bella Vista Grand, luxury in detail, excellence in spirit." The article was straightforward, yet lyrical. It told the story of a hidden guest, a global critic, who had visited the hotel undercover. It reviewed the amenities, the service, the food. But the final paragraph was what stood out. "Among the marble and imported flowers, I found an invisible woman, and she was the one who made me feel at home." The reaction was immediate. Executives sent emails. Agencies requested interviews. Lorraine declined them all. She stayed the same. Cleaned the reception area with her quiet care. Lined up key cards with the same precision, and before every shift she still knelt behind the desk holding her mother's crucifix. Because for her, this wasn't about fame. It was about dignity, about courage, about faith, the kind that doesn't shout, but endures. That night, she found an anonymous note in her locker. "You didn't just translate languages, you translated souls." Lorraine read it, folded the paper gently, and placed it inside the pages of her blue notebook. Then she smiled, eyes wet with quiet joy, and thought, "Mama, I think today you heard me too." Behind the grandeur of the Bella Vista, Lorraine's quiet brilliance had begun to stir discomfort. What started as admiration soon became fertile ground for suspicion. "Did you see her yesterday? Nobody learns languages like that, just like that. She must be using some hidden device. I heard she was in a mental institution once." The comments were quiet, but sharp. They came from mouths that once didn't know her name. Now they wouldn't stop saying it. Lorraine felt the eyes. In the halls, whispers rose and fell as she passed. It was like reliving an old wound, now dressed in new masks. Miranda Wallace, meanwhile, remained silent. She didn't praise. She didn't scold. But her discomfort was visible. Lorraine's success disrupted the hierarchy Miranda guarded so fiercely. And worse, there was no flaw to expose. Lorraine was flawless, punctual, reserved, polite. So the rumors grew in the cracks of vanity, small leaks poisoning clean water, until one administrator said it out loud, "She's making it up. It's all fake, a scam." That night, Lorraine ate alone, as usual, but the break room felt colder. No one sat near her. Someone even left when she walked in. And even in silence, she felt it. Because once you've been invisible, you know the weight of being seen with suspicion. At home, after her shower, she opened the old wooden box, her sacred place, and found her mother's. Letters. She read one, handwriting shaky but strong. Daughter, the world fears those who don't need approval. Don't let the noise dim your light. She pressed the paper to her chest, then opened the blue notebook and began to write. Not languages, but affirmations. I am not what they say. I don't need to prove anything. Those who know where they came from don't get lost in shortcuts. The notebook became shelter, and in that shelter a decision was born. At the closing ceremony of the conference, there would be speeches. Lorraine would speak, for the first time, even if her hands shook. The next morning she arrived early. She arranged the flags of the participating countries with the same delicate care. But something had shifted. Her eyes no longer avoided others. They met them gently. She knew the world wouldn't change overnight, but she was changing, and she could no longer hide. When a manager hinted that she might not be allowed on stage, Lorraine simply smiled. If not on stage, then on the floor. But I will speak. Miranda heard it from down the hall. She didn't comment, but slammed her office door minutes later. For the first time, she felt the weight of losing control, because this wasn't just about order or authority. It was about presence. And Lorraine, with her quiet presence, was shifting everything, without raising her voice. That afternoon, as the main hall was being prepared for the ceremony, Lorraine sat alone in the hotel's oratory. Holding the cross brooch in her hand, she whispered, Lord, I don't ask you to take me out of the fire, only to be with me in it. And then she cried, for her mother, for the words she never said, for the girl who fled university, for everything she had hidden, but also for the woman who was finally learning how to stay. The main hall of the Bella Vista Grand was wrapped in a solemn, expectant atmosphere. Dozens of flags stood perfectly aligned, while soft piano music floated gently through the air. Guests murmured in multiple languages, all waiting for the next name with a mix of curiosity and distraction. Behind the curtain, Lorraine felt her hands cold and her chest tight, as if she carried years of silence inside her bones. In her jacket pocket, the blue notebook gave her strength, not from its pages, but from the life it held. She touched the gold cross brooch, closed her eyes for 3 seconds and whispered, Lord, if it's your will, don't let me run now. The ceremony assistant leaned in and whispered, You're next. Lorraine nodded, legs trembling slightly, and adjusted her posture. Every step she was about to take would be a small reconciliation with the past, and every word, a scar finally given voice. The host spoke into the microphone with calm poise. Please welcome a woman whose quiet presence moved everyone during this conference. The audience stirred with confusion. Many looked around, unsure who it could be. Lorraine stepped through the curtains, walking with slow but steady steps. No glamorous makeup, no fancy gown, just her, in her humble uniform and her full presence. The hall fell into silence, as if time itself paused to witness her arrival. She walked to the microphone, clasped it with both hands, and took a long breath. She didn't scan the room for approval. She simply looked at them as someone ready to speak what had long remained locked inside. No script, no permission, just truth. Selamat pagi, she said in Malay, clear and steady. Then in Uzbek, Assalamu alaikum. In Amharic, Selam. In Haitian Creole, Bonjour. And finally in French, Bienvenue à tous. Each greeting came with a slight nod, a gesture of quiet reverence for each culture represented. The audience reacted with subtle gasps, softened eyes and hands. Over hearts. Lorraine knew every word, but none had been rehearsed. She wasn't performing. She was offering healing. And each word dissolved another wall between them. After a pause, she spoke again, this time in Portuguese, her voice filled with weight and grace. For many years I stayed silent because I was told my voice wasn't enough. The words fell like rain on dry earth. They said I was too shy, too withdrawn, too different. She paused and glanced upward, as if reaching for her mother's, eyes in the heavens. So I hid behind gestures, behind foreign languages, behind silence. With each sentence, Lorraine's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't stop. But today, I understand that the gifts God gives us are not meant to be buried. They are seeds to heal. And silence is sometimes where courage grows. I don't want to hide anymore. And if it's time to speak, I will. In the back of the room, Miranda Wallace stood frozen, her jaw tight, eyes locked on Lorraine. There was nothing left to block, no way to undo what had just been born in public view. Lorraine didn't look directly at her, but she felt her there. The French critic stood quietly, his eyes brimming with tears. He didn't applaud. He simply observed with the kind of respect reserved for sacred moments. Delegates from every nation looked at one another, visibly moved. Not because of fancy speech, but because of truth made flesh. Lorraine spoke with her body, her soul, her history. And in that space, everyone crossed a bridge together. No one left untouched. She drew another breath, closed her eyes briefly, and said with a quiet yet powerful voice, "There were times I couldn't say what I felt. But the words, they found me. They taught me that every language I learned was a way to heal myself. And that my gift wasn't to protect me, but to reach others. Today, I speak for myself, but also for all who were silenced, for the timid, the doubted, the different, for those who carry sacred gifts they're too afraid to reveal. The world tries to silence what it doesn't understand. But love is the language everyone understands." And then she closed with a phrase in Occitan. "L'amor es la lengua que tots comprennent." The silence that followed was deeper than any applause could have been. For 5 whole seconds, no one moved. Then someone in the middle stood up. Then another. And another. Until the entire room was on its feet, applauding in reverent awe. Lorraine didn't beam with pride. She closed her eyes for a moment, receiving what felt like an invisible embrace. Then nodded gently and stepped down from the stage. No rush. This wasn't a victory, it was release, and she didn't need to say anything more. Backstage, a young cleaning staff member waited, crying quietly. "You gave me courage. I'm like you," she whispered through trembling lips. Lorraine took her hand gently without needing words. The look they shared spoke volumes. It was the moment when 2 invisible souls finally saw each other. It was proof that Lorraine's presence wasn't coincidence, it was calling. The girl cried openly, and Lorraine wrapped her in a warm, protective embrace, just like her mother would have done. And in that quiet embrace, the cycle of silence began to break. That night, Lorraine returned to the hotel's oratory alone. The great hall was now empty, but inside her, a sanctuary had been built. With the crucifix in her hand, she whispered, "Mama, I did it." The candle flickered softly in the draft of the small room. Outside, New York remained loud, impatient, and enormous. But inside that quiet corner of faith, a woman had found her voice again. And she knew she had always been heard. The day after the ceremony, Bella Vista Grand woke up different. The hallways felt lighter, as if the air carried less judgment and more quiet respect. Lorraine arrived before her shift, as she always did, but this time she was greeted with nods and small, sincere smiles. There were no grand gestures, and she didn't want them. All she needed was for silence to stop being a shadow and start becoming space. At the front desk, where eyes used to avoid her, now they looked with genuine attention. A new staff member approached and said, "I'd love to learn from you." Lorraine smiled gently and replied, "We learn by listening." That's what she had done for decades. And finally, someone was listening to her. In the boardroom, the meeting was short and to the point. The rumors that had circulated about Lorraine were formally dismissed after an internal review. There was nothing suspicious, fabricated or exaggerated, only the truth. A woman with a rare gift and a quiet past. The hotel's administrative director handed her an official letter naming her cultural coordinator. The title felt too big for someone still wearing the same uniform and the same old shoes. But Lorraine didn't reject it. She accepted the envelope with humility and said, "Thank you. I'll care for this role the same way I cared for the front desk." One of the directors said, "This isn't just a position, it's a cultural shift." And in that moment, Lorraine realized the crossing had already begun. In the break room, co-workers who once ignored her now made conversation. They asked about languages, accents, childhood memories. Some offered apologies disguised as compliments. "You were always brilliant. We just didn't see it." Lorraine received it all with grace but kept a quiet distance. She knew the value of silence and of time. There was no bitterness, but there was no rush either. Rebuilding trust is like learning a new language. It takes listening, patience, and plenty of mistakes. And Lorraine, with her teacher's soul, was willing to wait. She answered questions kindly, explained calmly, and smiled genuinely. But she never positioned herself as a hero, just someone who survived being erased. Her daily rhythm didn't change much. She still arrived early, organized everything with care, and whispered her prayer before the shift. Her mother's cross remained on her collar. Her blue notebook stayed in her pocket. But now, younger staff members asked to see it. Lorraine allowed it, carefully. She showed them a few pages, explaining how she memorized sounds through color, rhythm, and feeling. Slowly, the notebook became more than paper. It became a symbol of something greater, that you can be different and still belong. Miranda Wallace avoided direct encounters. She kept herself in long meetings, and when she crossed paths with Lorraine, she only said, "Good morning," in cold, clipped English. The authority she once imposed now seemed fragile beside the presence of the woman she had tried to reduce. Lorraine didn't feel pleasure in Miranda's discomfort. She felt compassion, because she understood that those who belittle others are often hiding their own shame. And shame doesn't heal with revenge. Lorraine knew that the most beautiful form of justice is the kind that doesn't wound. And even if Miranda never apologized, she was already forgiven. Because the woman Lorraine was becoming no longer carried the weight of the wounded girl. Some local papers tried to interview Lorraine. She declined them all, with the same gentleness she used when sweeping crumbs off the counter. To her, recognition wasn't a reward, it was a result. What mattered most was staying present, serving, noticing, and welcoming. When asked if she'd give lectures, she replied, "Maybe someday. But for now, I'd rather keep listening." That was her mission now, to make the hotel a place where other voices could be heard, and slowly more staff began to feel seen, because one woman dared to be whole, and that gave others permission to exist. One afternoon, a young intern approached her office with a shy question. "Can you teach me how to learn like that?" Lorraine looked at him with warmth and said, "You learn by hearing what isn't being said." He furrowed his brow, puzzled, and she continued, "Every language has silence between the words. Learning means knowing how to hear that space." The boy wrote it down like it was gold. And in that moment, Lorraine understood that what she had started was bigger than her. It wasn't about fluency in language. It was about translating humanity, and that no one could ever erase. That night, alone at home, Lorraine set a kettle on the stove and turned on a classical music station. The steam rose slowly, like a breath of peace. She opened the blue notebook and found the very first page, now faded, where long ago she had written, "Be a shelter where the world screams." Beside it, she placed the anonymous note she had received earlier that week. She smiled, not with excitement, but with the calm of someone who has walked the desert and finally found water. She looked at the photo of her mother on the wall and said, "You taught me how to listen, and now the world hears me too." And so, with both feet on the ground and a wide open heart, Lorraine discovered that sometimes healing begins when we stop running from our own voice. It was 4:27 p.m. when the confusion began at the front desk. A Syrian child, no more than 6 years old, had gotten separated from her father while he filled out temporary immigration forms. The girl cried loudly, trying to say something no one could understand. Staff scrambled with translation apps, hand gestures, and guesses. Nothing worked. The once calm lobby became thick with tension. Some guests tried to help. Others just stood and watched. Lorraine was at the far end of the room explaining a report to a trainee when she heard the crying. The sound cut through everything, like a needle piercing the heart without permission. She placed her notebook on the table and walked slowly toward the scene. Instinct spoke louder than logic, and once again the world called for someone who could understand, without needing to translate. The girl was in full panic, red-eyed, trembling, overwhelmed with fear. Lorraine knelt down to her level, opened her palms gently, and whispered something softly. In Syrian Arabic. The child froze. Then she looked into Lorraine's eyes, as if recognizing something ancient, something safe. She repeated a word. Lorraine nodded. The child ran into her arms and clung to her like she had found home. A reverent silence spread across the room. Lorraine said nothing else, just held the girl close, eyes closed, breathing slow. It wasn't just comfort. It was two souls, both marked by pain, speaking the same language without needing words. Minutes later, the father arrived. Out of breath, wild with panic, scanning every face. When he saw his daughter in Lorraine's arms, he stopped cold. He cried before he could speak. He knelt, placed a hand on his heart, and thanked her, with whatever words he could find. Lorraine smiled softly, ran her hand over the child's hair, and said, "She's brave." The crowd moved, began clapping, slowly, gently, not wanting to break the spell. Lorraine stood up, handed the girl to her father, and stepped back. She wasn't seeking a stage, she was giving peace, and without knowing it, she had given them faith. Later, in the hotel's oratory, Lorraine lit a candle for the child. She sat on the wooden pew, opened her blue notebook, and wrote, "Today, an ancient language called my name." She touched the cross brooch as she always did and smiled in silence. What had happened couldn't be fully described, but it didn't need to be. She knew some things only heaven understands, and in that moment she knew God had spoken. Not in thunder or miracles, but in a child's cry and the exact response in her soul. On her way out, a young receptionist waited by the door. "You prayed before speaking to her, didn't you?" Lorraine looked at him and gave a soft smile. Sometimes prayer and answer are the same thing. The young man stood silent, eyes glistening. Lorraine touched his shoulder gently and kept walking. Night had fallen over New York, glowing with lit windows and awakened hearts. Bella Vista, somehow, would never be the same again, and neither would she, because the woman who once translated the world now knew how to translate heaven. Back in her apartment, Lorraine hung her jacket and removed her shoes slowly. The kettle on the stove, the radio playing a soft symphony, and her notebook open on the table. On the back cover, the verse her mother always loved. "For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding." Proverbs 2:6. Lorraine traced the words with her fingers, as if touching her mother's face. Then she wrote below with steady hand, "Today I understand." She no longer had to prove herself, no longer had to hide. The world had heard her voice, but most importantly, so had she. She sat by the window, warm cup in hand. Outside, the city pulsed. Inside, peace lived. Lorraine smiled at her reflection in the glass. A whole woman, healed, present. Her eyes still carried silence, but now, it was a silence full of meaning. A silence that translated everything. And even without speaking, it said, "Thank you, Lord, for letting me be the answer someone needed to hear." Lorraine never asked for a stage, never craved recognition. All she wanted was to get through each day with her soul intact. But on that chaotic afternoon, it was as if heaven called her by name. And when she answered, it wasn't with shouting or grand gestures. It was with words no one expected from her. Words that opened hearts across the world. Words that healed wounds too deep for sound. Today she still walks quietly through the hotel halls, wearing the same modest posture, the same golden brooch at her collar. But something has changed in the eyes of those who pass her. People pause to listen, even when she says nothing. Because now they know there's an entire world inside her. A world that speaks every language. A world that has learned to translate pain and turn it into peaceful silence. Lorraine's story reminds us that true gifts make no noise. They serve, they lift, they heal. The talent that comes from heaven doesn't need a spotlight. It shows up when the world falls apart. And maybe that's why she was chosen. Because she never wanted applause, just purpose. Because she never chased light, just direction. Because where there was confusion, she brought meaning. How often do we ignore those who walk beside us, in silence? How often do we judge those who speak little, not realizing they hear everything? Lorraine teaches us that true greatness lives where pride cannot enter. That speaking isn't just making sound, it's touching souls. That translating isn't repeating, it's understanding with the heart. And that the world needs fewer speeches and more eyes that see the invisible. Because there are women like Lorraine who save lives without ever saying they did. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because maybe like Lorraine, they've been waiting for someone to understand their language, even without words.